This thing says I'm live. Hi, everybody. I think this is working. I think we all know. Well, my hat, could that look worse? Really? I think we all know that my technology skills are not all that great. So I've already started and failed on this thing. But assuming you can hear me, we have a lot to talk about. This is crazy night we had here today. So first of all, thank you for joining here. And please, if you are having any trouble at all and can't hear me, or if there's anything technologically that's not working here, please let me know here in the messages. So first of all, thank you for coming here as we try this experiment. And we picked a crazy night to try out this experiment. So I think you've all heard the news probably by now, but so today they had the voting for the Today's Game Hall of Fame ballot. They had 10 people who were on the ballot. And as you all know, most of you know, I've written about all 10 of them leading up to this thing. I thought there was a pretty decent chance that one guy would get in, maybe two, but I didn't think so. As it turns out, two got in, one that I sort of thought could happen, and one that was a complete shock. And I know we'll have a lot to talk about with that. So the big news, obviously, Lee Smith was elected to the Hall of Fame tonight. This is something that I think that's been building up for quite some time now, and it's something that I think, he got more than 50% of the vote from the Baseball Writers Association one of his years. He retired with the most saves, so I always thought there was a pretty good chance that he was going to get elected. I didn't know that he was going to get elected first time around on the veterans, and I certainly didn't know that he was going to get elected unanimously. All 16 people voted for Lee Smith. It's a little bit of a stunner to me, but great news and a wonderful thing. And let me say that up front, because you guys know what's coming here in a minute. Anytime to me that people come into to get into the Hall of Fame, I think it's great. I think it's great. I mean, nobody who goes into the Hall of Fame is a bad player or a player who is, I mean, obviously people have strong feelings about them, from a character standpoint. Two great characters, guys, got into the Hall of Fame today. I don't think there's anybody who feels badly about that. So that's the top of the, that's where we start with the fact that it's, anytime people go into the Hall of Fame, it's a celebration and it's great. However, the second person who got into the Hall of Fame, as you all know, was Harold Baines, which is stunning, absolutely stunning, stupefying. We'll have a lot to say about that. But Harold Baines got in as well. He was the second. Harold Baines got 12 of the 16, which is exactly right at the line. He needed to get 75% of the vote. That means 12 of the 16 from the Today's Game era ballot committee. So 12 of 16 voted for Harold Baines. So that was stunning. And Harold Baines is now in the Hall of Fame. Of the others who got in, I had a little chart that I was going to be able to just show you using a different program that I'm not getting to use. So I unfortunately I can't. I don't think I can drag this onto here because I'm just not technologically sound enough to do that. But of the others, Lou Piniella just missed. He missed by one vote. He got 11 of the 12 votes as a manager. So Lou Piniella was clearly the third guy on this ballot that this committee enjoyed and felt was worthy. And then the other 7, none of them got more than 5. So they didn't even give us a number for them. I have predictions though, which I wrote down for each of them. So Albert Bell got 5 or less. I don't think he got a vote. Joe Carter got 5 or less. Probably got maybe 1 or 2 votes, but pretty close to 0. Will Clark, you have Will Clark and Harold Baines on the same ballot. And anyway, Will Clark probably got a couple of votes. I think Orel Hershiser might have gotten the full 5 votes. but he obviously fell well short. Davey Johnson, kind of surprising to me that Lou Piniella would get, be 1 vote short, and Davey Johnson wouldn't even come close, but he did not come close. He got less than 5. Charlie Manuel got less than 5, which is not surprising. And then George Steinbrenner, who maybe you'll have a couple of questions about him as well that we can get into, because he, to me, is a very, very interesting character on this thing. So that's the news. The news is 2 guys get in, Lee Smith and Harold Baines. Let me take a minute here to say something about the good news about this. Not that there's bad news necessarily, but here's, to me, my favorite part of both of these guys getting in. I really do believe that the 80s and early 90s in particular, before, things blew up for whatever reason you want to go into, and even the late 70s and mid 70s, a little bit of an underrepresented time to me in the Hall of Fame. And Harold Baines wouldn't have necessarily been the guy that I would have chosen to represent that time. And I'll show you a chart here in a minute of guys that to me are pretty clearly ahead of Harold Baines on the list from that time period. But it is good that time period is finally getting a little bit of its due, because it was getting kind of sad. I mean, until last year, when Alan Trammell gets in, Jack Morris, obviously a lot of controversy about him. But again, from that time period that I think is underrepresented, it's good to see guys get in from that time period. Lee Smith, clearly a pioneer in his own way for the 1-inning save, and a guy who did lead the league in saves. Also from that time period, a little bit different to me than Harold Baines, who is a full representative of that time period. So I'm going to get to some questions. Thank you. I'm seeing these here on the side already, and I'm excited to answer some. But first, I mentioned this runs created chart. And again, if my program was working, I would be able to actually show you this chart. But instead, I'm just going to put it up here next to the thing so I can actually see it. So what I did was I looked from 1970 to 1994 and just counted up who led who were the leaders in runs created among people who are not in the Hall of Fame. All right. So the good thing about doing it from 1970 to 1994 is you take out all of the controversial guys, right? So you take out Bonds and McGuire and Sosa and Sheffield and Manny and A-Rod and all those guys who, anytime you do a filter where they're not going into the Hall of Fame, those are the guys that always rise right to the top. So if you do it from 1970 to 1994, runs created is a very good stat to me for Harold Baines. Okay. Because you already know his WAR was, he had less than 40 wins above replacement, which is nowhere near Hall of Fame caliber. But we also know that people on that panel didn't look at WAR. That clearly that's not a big factor for anybody on that panel. So I wanted to look at runs created, which is, really should bode very, very well for Harold Baines, because Harold Baines had a lot of hits. He had some home runs, played a very long time. He probably would have gotten 3,000 hits had he not been stopped by the strike and not stopped by a couple of other injuries in his career. He came very close as it was to 3,000 hits. So I wanted to see, and I really am surprised by this. Okay. So this is the list of players from 1970 to 1994, which encompasses all of Harold Baines' career. Most runs created for guys who are not in the Hall of Fame. And I thought for sure Harold Baines would be top 5 in that group. I'm giving away that he's not top 5, but I thought for sure he would be. So number 1 on the list is Dwight Evans. And I think we should say this right up front. Dwight Evans should be on all of our lists for the Hall of Fame. He should be, Lou Whitaker has become such a celeb. How Dwight Evans is not all of our guys. I mean, every single person should be out there with like signs, holding up for Dwight Evans. Dwight Evans, 1,612 run created, pretty much by far the most from 1970 to 1994 among non-Hall of Famers, and an amazing right fielder, all those Gold Gloves, the great arm, World Series success, in 75 made the famous catch and all of those sorts of things. And Jim Rice is in the Hall of Fame, from his outfield. Dwight Evans might be. I mean, I'm a big Whitaker guy, and there are a few others. Ted Simmons is a guy that's very underappreciated, and a few others that I'm sure you'll mention in the comments. But Dwight Evans very well might be the most overlooked Hall of Fame candidate because he's never been on one of these ballots. He's very, very rarely even mentioned when people talk about the Hall of Fame. And at some point, it's like, you don't, it's not a question of whether or not people are arguing about whether Dwight Evans should be in the Hall of Fame. Nobody's even talking about him. Nobody's even mentioning it. So let's fight for Dwight Evans for the Hall of Fame. He's number one on the list. Number two is Pete Rose. We all know that story. Rose's career obviously goes before 1970, so he has a bunch more runs created between 63 and 70. Darrell Evans is number three on the list. He's a very popular sabermetric candidate because he walked a lot and did a lot of good things and was very underrated. I'm actually working on a new series that I'm going to unveil as part of the Baseball Writers Hall of Fame thing that will run out over the next month, and you'll see Darrell Evans is fairly prominent there. Number four on the list is Dave Parker, and I want to mention this. I don't see how you vote Harold Baines in and you don't vote in Dave Parker. This forget stats, forget the WAR, forget any kind of advanced thoughts or any kind of. And I don't understand how you can look at Dave Parker and Harold Baines and tell me Harold Baines had a better career than Dave Parker. Okay, I mean it's not feasible. Dave Parker won an MVP. Dave Parker was the best player in baseball for a while. He obviously had the drug issues in the middle of his career, but then he came back and had another stretch. I've never voted for Dave Parker. I don't think Dave Parker, to me, he's just below the line, but the line is now Harold Baines. That's a completely different game. Number five is Lou Whitaker. We all know about how Lou Whitaker is. So he is not in the top five. So I thought, okay, well, where is he now? Number six is Dale Murphy. I'm going to say it again. How could you vote for Harold Baines and not vote for Dale Murphy? So now we're talking about a panel. Dave Parker was on this ballot, a couple of years ago, last year, whenever that period of time, he was on the ballot and they didn't vote for him. Dale Murphy has been on the ballot. What in the world did Harold Baines do that Dale Murphy? I did vote for Dale Murphy. I think Dale Murphy is a very, very strong Hall of Fame candidate for a lot of reasons on and off the field. I'm stupefied, absolutely stupefied. Number seven is Brian Downing. Okay. Does anybody think of Brian Downing? Brian Downing had a great career. Brian Downing had more runs created than Harold Baines. Okay. Number eight is Al Oliver, another great hitter who nobody thinks about for the Hall of Fame. Number nine is Keith Hernandez. And again, you want to talk about a guy who not only was, a great hitter, runs created, probably the greatest defensive first baseman ever, a guy that changed the fundamentals of the position. It's getting crazy, isn't it? Number 10 is Ted Simmons. So now we have a catcher who had more runs created than Harold Baines. Okay. Harold Baines was a designated hitter. We all know that. It shouldn't prevent him from being in the Hall of Fame, but you might want to have more runs created than Ted Simmons, who is not in the Hall of Fame and missed by whatever he'd missed last year or 2 years ago by a vote or two. I don't get it. We're still not to Harold Baines, by the way. Number 11 is Jack Clark. And there are some Jack Clark people. I've actually hear every now and again from Jack Clark people. That's I don't know what to say. And then number 12 is Harold Baines. So Harold Baines with 1,257 runs created between 1970 and 1994. I guess Harold Baines played on a little bit longer than that. Did he play? Actually, should look this up here. Got my trusty iPad here, which has the Harold Baines played till 97. No, that's Lee Smith. Sorry. No, he kept on playing. I'm sorry. Okay, so he did play longer. He did have one more good year in 99. He had the 25 homer, 103 RBI year. So you could do that. But the problem is if you start going in to the mid to late 90s, you're going to start getting some of these guys that you don't want on the list. So that's why I kept it between that time period. That really was Harold Baines' core period of time. and all of those players were had more runs created than he did. So anyway, stunning, surprising, and I think we'll talk a little bit about as I answer some of these questions. We'll talk a little bit about what this says about the Hall of Fame and the committee that's voting in these people and how they view things, because they clearly, what we have are two different ways of looking at the game, at least two, maybe more than two different ways. You have the BBWAA's way of looking at the game, and then you have the committee, and the committee is clearly moved entirely away into their own realm where, they are going to vote for people based on criteria that kind of hard to figure. All right, let's answer some questions here. Let's see here. I love Misty 1985. Hi, Misty. Rangers have gotten a lot of heat for almost 30 years for including Sammy Sosa to trade for Harold Baines. Guess which one of those is going to the Hall of Fame? Very good point. Very, very good point. So I don't think Sammy Sosa is going to go to the Hall of Fame anytime soon. And I'll tell you what, I mean, one of the things that I like to look at when I look at these committees, because these committees have been very strange through the years. I mean, I think we all know that. You look through the Hall of Fame and you look at the players that are in from the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, that you go, how in the world did they get in? They usually snuck in through some sort of committee, and the committee often had somebody who was their champion, who knew them, who really pushed for them. And then, the Hall of Fame tried to get away from that, especially in 2001, when Bill Mazeroski was elected. They decided to go to these new kinds of committees and hopefully get away from some of that, buddy type of thing where, hey, I played with this guy, so I'm going to push for this guy and so on. And what happened was they just didn't elect anybody. So there was about a 15-year period where no living players were elected. So I hated that. So they needed to spruce it up. And I think they probably did tell these committees, hey, we need to keep this thing vibrant and alive and let's go. But then, like I said, this Harold Baines thing has really thrown me here. It's very, very surprising. Very surprising. All right, let's see here. Greg wants to know, does this guarantee that Edgar gets the votes from the writers now? It's a really good question. I think Edgar's going to get in. I don't think this is going to have any effect on Edgar getting in. First of all, a lot of people have already voted. And most of the people who have not voted, including me, I haven't sent in my votes yet. We know who we're going to vote for, and this would not change that voting at all. I mean, that really wouldn't have any effect on it. But this does give you a sense, and this is something that I always try to keep an eye out when I'm looking at how this, how the voting goes for the veterans, is a hint. What does this tell you about what the Hall of Fame is, what the Hall of Fame wants to be, where the Hall of Fame would like this thing to go? And, they don't have complete control over these committees by any stretch, but they do set up these committees. These committees are given a little bit of a sense of what the Hall of Fame wants. You could tell from the balloting. So I wrote about this, maybe you saw this in 2 years ago when they had the Today's Game ballot. Mark McGwire was on the ballot. This year he was taken off and Joe Carter was put on. Okay. He was the only one taken off. The only player taken off that ballot was Mark McGwire. So clearly what they wanted to do is they wanted to move away from all of the steroid talk, all the PED talk, and focus on the players. And I think that's what the Hall of Fame would like to do. I think the Hall of Fame really would like to get it away from the Bonds talk, get it away from the Clemens talk, get it away from Sosa and Sheffield and the rest, and move on to baseball. Okay, so I really think that was a big key here, and so I can't help but think that the way that these guys voted is an indication of what kinds of players they want to start electing to the Hall of Fame. Harold Baines is a class act. He's a guy that played for a very long time, had a lot of hits, great respect throughout the game, deserving of all of those things. And I think that they sort of wanted to represent, someone who represented the game, which is fine. which is fine. Of course, I think if you're going to do that, then where's Dwight Evans? Where's Dale Murphy? Where's, Al Oliver? Where are a lot of guys? But I don't think that's going to have an effect on how the writers vote. I think the writers are going to keep voting the way they vote. I do think Edgar is going to get in this year. There are a bunch of guys that I'm very curious about from this ballot, but I don't think Edgar is going to be affected by this. But I do wonder, how do you have Harold Baines in the Hall of Fame and then not David Ortiz? And I think Ortiz was going to go anyway, but now you've set a different kind of standard, and I do wonder if it'll have some effect down the road. All right, let's see here. If Edgar doesn't get in now, do we burn Cooperstown down? I think that seems a little harsh, Chris. Let's see here. Is this a Rick Farrell situation? So many people threw Baines a vote that he made it over Piniella. The Piniella thing is surprising to me. I'm really trying. One of the things I always try to do is get into the mindset of the voters. So I try to get out of my own way and try to get into the mindset of the voters, and they'll think, okay, who, like this year, like what do I think the voters are going to vote in Roy Halladay first ballot, right? So that's sort of an open question. I think he will. I think he's going to get elected, but I'm going to vote for him. But I don't know that that's really the case. It's just something that I think he's going to get elected because I'm trying to get in my mindset. I don't know how to get into the mindset of this committee. I really don't. Lou Piniella was a character. He's a guy that was beloved throughout the game. He certainly is right in the middle of a bunch of managers that are, worthy of Hall of Fame consideration. Davey Johnson, Jim Leland. I don't know why Jim Leland is not getting more consideration. I don't know if he's not retired long enough, or how Jim Leland wasn't on this ballot is kind of baffling to me. But guys like that, because, and this is where I wanted to get back to with George Steinbrenner. George Steinbrenner was twice suspended by baseball, twice. And really was a guy who gave baseball black eye after black eye repeatedly throughout his life. For me, as a guy who thinks that the Baseball Hall of Fame should be an expansive view of the game, how it really is played, a realistic view of baseball, I'm all for putting George Steinbrenner in the Hall of Fame. I think the game would not be, it just wouldn't be the same game. It would not have been the same game the last 40 years, and it wouldn't be the same game now if not for George Steinbrenner. He had a huge impact. I don't think any voter should go, any owner should go into the Hall of Fame, but owners do go in the Hall of Fame. And if you're going to put owners in the Hall of Fame, to me, George Steinbrenner is in the top rank of those guys, even with all of the negatives. That said, they pulled Mark McGwire off this ballot. So clearly they don't want controversial people. So why George Steinbrenner? And, we've seen this before. Obviously Bud Selig was a controversial guy in a lot of ways, sailed right in. All three of those managers who went in a few years ago, Torre and La Russa and Bobby Cox, all had some weird and quirky, not necessarily against them, but La Russa's players obviously were in the forefront of steroids. Bobby Cox had his own personal issues, and Torre and the Yankees, again with Torre also was involved in with some people who were very successful who clearly used PEDs, but they sailed right in. So I don't understand it. I can't quite get into their mindset, and it's confusing to me. It's confusing to me. All right, let's see here. This thing is moving much faster than I am here. Let's see. Paul says Baines' highest MVP vote rank is 9th. That is correct. Yeah, all right. Does the Baines election help Kenny Lofton get into the Hall of Fame? Asks James. Well, again, Kenny Lofton is not going to get in through the baseball writers. He's going to have to get in through the Veterans Committee. Maybe the Veterans Committee. See, for that to happen, the Veterans Committee would have to look at players based on, sort of this expansive way that I think a lot of us look at the game. They have to look at their overall contribution to the game. I don't know that they didn't just look at Harold Baines and say, boy, you almost got 3,000 hits and let's vote him in. you know, and I think if anybody is going to get something out of this, it might be a guy like Omar Vizquel, right? Who has a bunch of hits, and you know, Vizquel is, you know, was a terrific shortstop and all of that sort of thing, won a bunch of Gold Gloves. And so that's a guy to me that could get elected, you know, sort of in the Harold Baines way, you know, where you start looking at a guy because he has a lot of hits, he should go into the Hall of Fame. And by the way, Omar Vizquel, I mean, if Harold Baines, if I could only vote for one, if you told me, okay, you have two guys and one's Harold Baines and one's Omar Vizquel, I'm going to vote for Omar Vizquel. And again, no offense to Harold Baines, who had a fine career, but Harold Baines was a designated hitter who really did not have very many impactful years. That's why it's kind of surprising. I see a few of you mentioned Vizquel here. That's good. Paul wants to know, do I like this result better than having no one elected for the decade? And the answer is absolutely yes. I'm not unhappy that Harold Baines and Lee Smith got into the Hall of Fame. Far from it. I think it's going to be great. That weekend is going to be a tremendous party, and you know, I'd love to see some old White Sox fans and old Cubs and Cardinals and, you know, Lee Smith fans showing up for this. You know, Lee Smith, really one of the coolest parts of Lee Smith going into the Hall of Fame is he was signed by Buck O'Neil. So that this is Buck's third Hall of Famer that he signed. He signed Ernie Banks. Well, he managed Ernie Banks when he was with the Monarchs, and then was part of the Cubs, you know, bringing him over. He signed Lou Brock and he signed Lee Smith. So I think that's really, really cool. And as far as Harold Baines goes, like I say, he's a class act. He's a player that, you know, had a very, you know, had a big impact on a lot of people. So I love that. I love that part of it. Where I'm struggling is I have no idea how it happened. I'm totally, completely baffled about it. I can't figure out what it is other than he had a lot of hits. I can't figure out. He doesn't have the MVPs. He doesn't have the All-Star appearances. He doesn't have the big seasons. He doesn't have the impact. He doesn't have the postseason. He doesn't have any of those things that I would normally think this kind of committee would look at closely, other than hits. And he was he was a long-standing player. I'll tell you, I just thought of another player that this will have a huge impact on. So if you want to know, I'm going to make a guarantee right now. So this is your only YouTube Live guarantee that you're going to get. This guarantees Fred McGriff is going to the Hall of Fame. This guarantees that Fred McGriff will go to the Hall of Fame, first ballot, first time he appears on that. So he is. This is his 10th year on the baseball writers. He's not going to get elected by the baseball writers. I think he still has to wait 5 years before he can appear on a Veterans Committee ballot. I don't know why they didn't fix that. I mean, it's always been 15 years, but you know, then they shortened the amount of time they can be on the baseball writers ballot. So I don't know why they didn't shorten the amount of time it takes before you can get onto a Veterans ballot. But the first time he gets on a Veterans ballot, he will get voted in unanimously. I'm telling you this right now, because basically Fred McGriff is a really much better Harold Baines. I mean, you know, he played a lot more first as well, but he was just way better, and he walked a bunch more, and he hit with a lot more power, and he was just way better. So if there is something good that comes from this in the sense of who else is going to get elected because of this, guaranteed that Fred McGriff is going to get elected to the Hall of Fame. All right, let's see here. James says it's because he thinks that they are attempting to emphasize class, acts, and character, which is fine. That very well may be true, that the committee is really focused on getting this thing away. Maybe the Hall of Fame is sick of being tied to these players that they believe besmirch the game. They want to go for the class acts. That's fine. I've seen nothing before this to suggest that. Okay, there was Dale Murphy got almost no support, almost no support. And several of these guys that were totally every bit the class act that Harold Baines was, but had better careers than Harold Baines, didn't get voted in. That's the part that gets me. Again, Harold Baines going in, it's going to be a great moment for him, for the game, for all of those people. And I don't want it to sound like I don't believe that, because I do. I believe that deeply. I just don't know where this started and why this was the guy that they decided to start this with. Maybe this is going to start the trend, and then maybe over the next 5 to 10 years, Dwight Evans and Dale Murphy and Lou Whitaker and a bunch of other guys like that will get elected, and it'll be the Harold Baines that opened the floodgates, and that'll be great. But I'm kind of stunned that it's Harold Baines that does that. Let's see here. If the committee has another, this is a good one, Travis. If the committee has another year or two of left field selections, do they revamp the structure of this committee's? Again, they seem to be trying to bridge the gap between electing, not electing. It's a really good question. Here's sort of my view of the way the Hall of Fame looks at this. The Hall of Fame needs people to get elected. It's not good for the Hall of Fame for it to be stagnant. It's not good when they don't vote anybody in. Okay, the year that nobody got elected, that was not good for the Hall of Fame. The year that all those years where no veterans were elected, not good for the Hall of Fame. The year that they didn't vote Buck O'Neil into the Hall of Fame, 2006, when they did not vote him in, not good for the Hall of Fame. Hall of Fame doesn't want that. Hall of Fame wants it to be a vibrant experience that is growing through the years. So that's where it starts. The Hall of Fame is also very, very sensitive about not putting people into the Hall of Fame that in any way that they feel lower the quality of the Hall of Fame, right? So that's they brag all the time. It's only the top 1% of all players, and they'll tell you this till. So when Bill Mazeroski was elected, there was such a huge outcry that they did fundamentally change things, and they went to a structure that is no longer in existence. You remember they actually had the Hall of Famers vote for a while, and you let the Hall of Famers vote, forget it. Nobody's ever getting in. They've slammed the door right behind them. They're never letting anybody else in to the Hall of Fame. So yes, there is a possibility if a few of these guys. I don't think Harold Baines is going to fit that bill, though. I think because Harold Baines does have some good old school cred, he would have gotten 3,000 hits had it not been for the strikes in 81 and 94. He did it with some power. I believe, and again, you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, I believe his number's retired by the White Sox. Is it not? I'm fairly certain that it is. So he's got plenty of sort of Hall of Fame street cred. And so I think that it'll be okay with him. I don't think the Hall of Fame is in any way unhappy about him getting in. I think that what's going to happen, though, is will they keep that consistency? Will they keep that consistency? Is this we've come to a year where, I think the Hall of Fame loved it last year, where two guys, Jack Morrison and Alan Trammell, get elected. It was really cool for the Hall. Everybody was very happy about it. And I think the Hall of Fame really liked that. And I think that, again, I don't think they went to this committee and said, hey, vote us in some people. I think that there probably was a sense of, hey, this is supposed to be a celebration. There are a lot of good players on these ballots. Please give them, really serious consideration. And there were a few people on this committee, by the way, who had direct connections to Harold Baines. So there's a little bit of that cronyism I was talking about before. But regardless, I don't think that's going to affect it. But if a few other guys like this get in, I'll tell you what'll happen. If this committee ever voted in a suspected PED user, if they just decided this year they were going to vote in McGuire, then they would have been disbanded. The Hall of Fame doesn't want that. But guys like Harold Baines, I think the Hall of Fame is okay with. All right, let's see here. Pink Algebra says the Hall of Fame is more fun with a few semi-stars. Well, that's good because there are a few semi-stars in the Hall of Fame. Look, the other thing that should be said, and really every Hall of Fame conversation should have this in there, Harold Baines is not the worst guy in the Hall of Fame. He's not. And so, we can, there are a bunch of guys on the outside of the Hall of Fame who, to me, and probably to many of you, have a better case for the Hall of Fame. But you look at the Hall of Fame, there are 10, 15 guys in the Hall of Fame that didn't have careers as good as Harold Baines. So, I mean, he's not at the bottom, and he's not necessarily that close to the bottom. But he is, I would say, the guy who in the last, he's probably the I don't want to say worst player because that sounds worse than I mean it. He is the lowest ranked player by WAR, by this, of anybody elected in the last, what do you think, 25, 30 years, other than relievers. I don't think there's been a guy with a 40 WAR or 39 WAR who's been elected since, Bill Mazeroski probably, so I think very clearly he's on the bottom rung from players elected recently, but you go back 60, 70 years among players and go back 30, 40 years among the Veterans Committee votes. He's not near the bottom. All right, let's see here. Pink Algebra wants to know who's on the committee now. I saw the list. I know that Pat Gillick's on it. I've seen the list. I don't have it in front of me, but oh wait, I love Misty puts it on here. Very good. Thank you. I love you, Misty. Roberto Alomar. Oh wait. Roberto Alomar, Burt Blyleven, Pat Gillick, Tony La Russa, Greg Maddux, Joe Morgan, John Sherholtz, Ozzie Smith, Joe Torre, Al Avila, Paul Beeston, McPhail, Jerry Reinsdorf, Steve Hurt, Tim Kirkagen, and Claire Smith. So let's just say it. There are no sabermetric people on that ballot. None. There's not one. Not a single person on there that is sabermetrically inclined. So when you look at that group, and look, there are a lot of guys on that ballot I like very much. Steve Hurt's a great guy. Tim Kirkagen, great guy. Claire Smith, wonderful, lover. Some players on there. Roberto Alomar, Burt Blyleven. Maddux is on there. That's interesting. Ozzie's on there. It's a pretty old school group. That when you look at the committee, that makes a lot more sense, doesn't it? For who's going to get voted in. Let's see here. Edwin wants to say Fred McGriff will be elected, right? Yes, he will. He will totally be elected. Let's see. Do you have any good Lee Smith stories from his short tenure with the Royals in '98? No, it's funny. I mean, Lee Smith's a wonderful guy. He's a wonderful, wonderful guy. And I've had some great experiences with him because of Buck, because obviously he adored Buck, and Buck was his scout, was his mentor in so many ways. And, Buck always used to say when he showed up in Louisiana to scout Lee Smith, he saw another J.R. Richard, which is a pretty cool sort of, you can look through the years, Buck scouted J.R. Richard in Mississippi in the 60s and then scouted Lee Smith in Mississippi in the 70s. So very cool. The problem with Lee Smith when he was with the Royals in '98 is during that stretch of time, the Royals got a bunch of sort of formerly good closers and guys and you never got a great feel for those guys because they didn't really know why they were there. It was the whole thing was kind of confusing. And, there was this sense they were there for a payday, but there was also a sense that they still wanted to, be great. I remember when Terry Pendleton was on the Royals in the early 2000s, another, guy who was a great guy. And I said to him, is this a good opportunity for you to teach these young players how to, their approach and all the things that you were so good at? And Terry Pendleton said, it's hard to be a teacher when you're hitting 200, which he was. And by the time Lee Smith got to the Royals, it wasn't the same. But Lee Smith, that is 478 saves. I mean, to me, I thought there was an excellent chance of him getting in. I didn't think it was going to be unanimous, but I thought he had the best chance of anybody to get in this year. Let's see here. What does this do for Billy Wagner? That's a really good question. But here's the thing. So Billy Wagner, to me, is destined to sort of fade away, which is really, really a shame. And I think it's going to happen after Mariano gets in pretty close to unanimously. It won't be unanimous. But once Mariano comes in, he becomes not the standard. You don't have to be as good as Mariano, but the whole thing has been shifted up a notch. You know, one of the things that I'll be writing about as we go forward is every time a great player gets elected, it moves the whole chart up. It moves everything up. You don't have to be as good as Mike Schmidt, but when Mike Schmidt got elected, third base became a different position for the Hall of Fame. It just became a tougher position. You know, when Pie Traynor was the best third baseman, you know, that was the standard. And then, you know, then Eddie Matthews was the standard, Brooks Robinson was the standard, Mike Schmidt was the standard, and so on. And Adrian Beltre is going to come in and be, in his own way, he's going to be the standard. So you know, I think Mariano is going to change the dynamic for relievers. Right now, the best relief pitcher in the Hall of Fame is probably Hoy Wilhelm, maybe. You know, when you look at the bigger numbers, you know, Dennis Eckersley, but his is a career split up between starting and relieving. There are guys that are going to put Trevor Hoffman on that list. I happen to think Billy Wagner was every bit the pitcher that Trevor Hoffman was. Mariano was clearly better than all of those guys, and so he's gonna push this thing up. And I think it's going to really hurt a guy like Billy Wagner more than it's going to help him to have a guy like Lee Smith voted in. But I don't know. Billy Wagner is a guy that I really believe it should be a very serious candidate once the Veterans Committee. I don't think he'll ever get 75% of the vote. I don't think he'll ever come close. But you know, he's a guy that the Veterans Committee should take a very, very close look at. Let's see here. Ross Youngs, just mentioning the name Ross Youngs is always well worth doing. Michael says fruit pie is delicious. Joe, come on, give it up to Mike before we wrap up. I'm not doing that. It's clearly he's wrong. And I can tell you guys that we're going to have our big holiday draft tomorrow with a surprise guest on there. So you can check that out. The podcast will be coming out hopefully on Tuesday. I think it'll be on Tuesday. We're doing our I'll even give you the number since it's a nice, tidy, small group of us. 6 people will be drafting in the holiday draft this year, and I think you'll like it. I think you'll like it. Let's see here. Okay, let me get 2 more here. Let's see. Oh, Paul wants to know about Smoltz. The Smoltz wasn't a closer very long at all. In fact, surprisingly short period of time as a closer. I always sort of thought of his career as being a little bit split, much in the same way that Eckersley's was, but I think he was only a closer 3 years, maybe 3 or 4 years at most. So he was not a guy that that really, you know, was that great as closer. All right, so here we go. What about these guys? So I'll talk a little bit about these 5 pitchers, and then one more question, and then we'll call it a night. What about Saberhagen, David Cohn, Kevin Brown, Hershiser, Doc Gooden? So I'm going to save Saberhagen and Cohn for last. Kevin Brown is a problematic character for a lot of reasons. He fell off the ballot very quickly. His numbers are staggeringly good. I mean, they're very, very good. They're clear Hall of Fame numbers from a wins above replacement standpoint, from a strikeout walk, from, you know, all of the, you know, the innings, and, you know, and frankly, his, you know, great seasons. He had great seasons, but he was not well liked. There's some, you know, whispers about PEDs with him. I just don't think anybody's going to pick up his case. I just don't think anybody's is going to, you know, dive in and say, hey, you know, Kevin Brown, he didn't, one of the things that you need to do, and I don't know if this is fair or not fair, but you need to have champions, sort of among the writers, among the veterans, among fans, whatever the case may be. Burt Blyleven is really in the Hall of Fame because he had a few champions, Tim Raines, Jonah Carey, and a bunch of other guys, true champions of them. And I don't think anybody's going to champion Kevin Brown. Hershiser, you saw him on the ballot this year. He's well liked. I don't think that it's going to keep going for him. Gooden is a really interesting one, and again, he has a little bit of the Kevin Brown problem. It's not quite the same. He's better liked in a lot of ways, but he had a more problematic life in many ways. And who's going to take up the banner? I remember talking to one of his teammates, and to me, Doc Gooden at his very best is Pedro. I mean, he's Randy Johnson. He's at the very, very height of how good you could be. I mean, he's Koufax. He's for 2 years, he was as dominant as you could be. It wasn't long enough, and I don't know who's going to take up his case. That leaves us the two guys that I'll say a couple of words about: Brett Saberhagen and David Cohn. Somebody at some point is going to break through and get to the Hall of Fame with 180 wins. It's going to happen. Sooner or later, it's going to happen because, as you all know, wins are down. We just had a guy win the Cy Young with 10 wins. Pitcher wins are no longer being viewed as being especially important. We haven't crossed that barrier yet. I mean, you're still at the point if you had 190 wins. I think Sabes had only 160 something wins, I believe. But in that range, 160, 170, 180, 190 wins. Right now, you're just getting written off. Just getting written off. No matter how good you were, you're getting written off. And the truth is that David Cohn, in particular, but Saberhagen too, as a 2-time Cy Young winner, were both dominant pitchers. And I could make a very strong case for either one of them over several other guys that have gotten into the Hall of Fame in recent years. But those guys had a lot more wins, a lot more innings. And that's just sort of how the way it looks. So I don't know if we're going to get a Harold Baines-like character who's going to come along, who's going to get voted in with a very small number of wins, and if that's going to open the door for some of these other guys. But for right now, those guys are still struggling. All right, last one here. Let's see. What do you guys got? Would you publish all the Browns' diary entries in a book once they win the Super Bowl? Well, of course. I'll publish them now. I'm ready to go. This is great. Now, let's see here. Let's see. All right, last one. This is a good one here. Will Jim Edmonds ever get serious reconsideration? I'll pick that one because I've actually just did a little bit of research on Jim Edmonds today for some of the stuff that I'm working on for the next few weeks. Jim Edmonds was a great player, but he was also a guy who could go in just for hitting. So this is sort of the way I've been started to look at these things. Like the question is start with a bat. Let me rant on this for about 2 minutes here. So you start with a bat. Most of us would say that hitting is the most important part of a baseball player's career. Offensively, the hardest thing to do is to hit. If you're a great fielder beyond belief and you can't hit, it's very difficult for you to even get a job. If you're an amazing hitter and you can't field, somebody will definitely sign you. So start with a bat. So the question is somebody's bat, that alone, forget every other part of their game, is the bat good enough to get you into the Hall of Fame? For Ted Williams, for instance, obviously, far and away, his bat was good enough to get him into the Hall of Fame. Okay, but Ted Williams wasn't that great at other things. Okay, he wasn't a great fielder by any means. He wasn't a great base runner. He wasn't fast. But his bat was so good, he gets in. Then you look at a guy like Willie Mays. Obviously, Willie Mays could go into the Hall of Fame for his bat. Clearly, far and away, good enough bat to get in the Hall of Fame if he did nothing else. If Willie Mays had been a DH his whole career, he'd be in the Hall of Fame. Okay, we all know that. But Willie Mays was also perhaps the greatest center fielder ever. Willie Mays defensively could get in the Hall of Fame with pretty much a pretty mediocre bat. He was that good defensively. So, and then as a base runner, one of the all-time great base runners, not a great base stealer in numbers because the people didn't steal bases as much back then. But regardless, everybody knows one of the all-time great base stealers. So you have lots of different layers for him to getting him into the Hall of Fame. Jim Edmonds' bat is pretty close to good enough to getting him in the Hall of Fame, just his bat. And I feel the same way about Larry Walker. Just his bat is good enough. It's pretty close. I mean, it might not get him there, but pretty close to getting him the Hall of Fame. Then you look at Jim Edmonds defensively, and he was an amazing defensive player, right? So he was an amazing defensive player on top of having a bat pretty close to being good enough to the Hall of Fame. I don't know why we don't look at it a little bit more that way. And that's really what I'm going to try to introduce over the next, month or so is this level of, okay, can you get to this level? Harold Baines just goes in the Hall of Fame. He had to do it entirely with his bat because he was a DH, couldn't run. So he was entirely with his bat that he had to get into the Hall of Fame. And he is getting into the Hall of Fame entirely for his bat. Edgar Martinez, in some ways a little bit underrated, did play defense before his knees went out and wasn't bad defensively. But then his knees and his arm, and he had all kinds of issues, and it became a DH. But his bat has to be good enough to get in the Hall of Fame. His bat is far and away. It's not close. It's not close. He's a third better than he needed to be to get to the Hall of Fame, in my view. So I think that's a really interesting way to look at these things. Let's pick a line, and how much does the bat get you over that line? If the bat gets you over the line, then you're in. You're in the Hall of Fame. If your bat gets you close to the line, okay, do you have enough defense? Do you have enough base running? Do you have enough leadership? Do you have enough postseason moments? Do you have enough MVP balloting? Do you have enough whatever it is you like for the Hall of Fame? It's really an interesting way to look at it. So I'm a big Jim Edmonds guy is what I'm trying to say. I don't know because I don't know exactly what this committee looked at, and I don't know what a committee, whatever it's going to be 7 or 8 years from now, which is when Jim Edmonds would become eligible. I don't know what they'll be looking at, but I sure think that he's a guy that to me has a lot of Hall of Fame, a lot of Hall of Fame cred in my mind, and a guy that should very seriously be considered. So excellent. Well, guys, thank you so much for doing this. This was really a lot of fun for me. And I see a couple of you at least. This makes me feel good. Would like me to do this more often. I think I will try to do this more often, and would love to have you come along, and hopefully I'll get some of this technological stuff worked out so that I can actually put some stuff on the screen like I was intending to do, but we'll get to that later. Anyway.